All right, welcome to our Anything Goes podcast. We're excited to have you again for this episode. I'm here with Pastor Mark one more time. Hello.
Hello, audience.
We are going to hit a couple random things today. We want to talk a little about the book of Psalms because that's what we're doing as a church right now. So wanted to ask Mark a few questions about the book of Psalms, maybe break down a little bit about the book being art and what art means and Christianity and art and the world of art a little bit and how we attack genre and all that kind of thing. So we'll spend a little time on that. But then also, I want to ask Mark about his book a little bit. Got his book here.
Hey, look at that.
Because we get to the end of the year.
Problemofgod.com. Grab your copy now.
Yes.
10 at a time is the best.
Buy in bulk. That's what we say.
Yes.
Because we got to the end of the decade and everyone's doing these posts about things, and Mark actually was listed on some end of decade posts of, books of the decade and Christian writing. It's great. So I wanted to ask him about some of that stuff. And I think for a lot of us, it'd be kind of interesting to know how that all actually happens. How did you actually write a book and get it published and all that? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then actually you're working on another book. So we'll give you a little sneak peek on what that's all about.
There you go.
So let's start with Psalms.
Yes.
Why did we do this series? Why did we do Psalms? Why did we sit down and say, Psalms is the book, the next book we should do?
Well, I think there's different Bible books appeal to different kinds of people in certain ways. So there's, they say Martin Lloyd-Jones is one of the best preachers ever. He has 6 volumes on Ephesians. And literally he preached through it for 8 years or whatever. And I think he had 1 volume on narrative because his whole expository approach was these analytical books, the epistles, Romans. Let's get verse by verse, technical words that mean this, and he could spend years on that. So what I try to do is we've done that, but try to, there's all kinds of different people to reach and all kinds of different personalities that connect to the Bible in different ways. So sometimes you got to do narrative like we did Matthew. Sometimes you got to do epistle like we did 1 Corinthians and analyze every word. And sometimes you got to do poetry like the Psalms. And so I think it's trying to this wide breadth of the library of Scripture, trying to kind of pull out different ways of connecting, all with the same goal of glorifying
so
Jesus.
How do you think is best to approach a book like Psalms? We have a little bit more time in this kind of format to be able to talk about this than on a Sunday morning. But just for people listening to this, like you're saying, you go to some of those other books and it's like, okay, it was kind of, for the most part, telling you what to think about what it's saying. But Psalms is like poetry and art.
It's poetry.
So
even the way you say it elevates.
Right, I said it differently.
Poetry.
It's different.
You just feel like
Feels
yes.
So for the person listening, what would we say? Here are some of the tools, or some of the ways you should approach this book and books like it in the Old Testament.
Well, you got to go into it with kind of the art and science of interpreting and say, okay, this is poetry. So there's going to be things it says that might be writ large or exaggerated or whatever. And then there's things that are like, okay, that's literally saying that. And so it's, but you got to approach it like a piece of art and go like, okay, this is artistic. And so there's got to be some margin here for interpretive space. And I can't press every single sentence to build a whole theology on it because 3 Psalms later, he's going to say something else that's a little bit, artistically different. It's kind of like when you're reading Proverbs and it's like, if you raise your children according to the Bible, they will not stray.
Right.
And then you go, well, is that actually 100% every time true? No, I know a lot of people whose kids have strayed and they've raised them according to the Bible. So
I think my kids have already strayed.
Right.
They're 9 months old. I think
they're straying.
Done.
So it's like, was that a math equation the book of Proverbs told me? Or was it like a general truth at 30,000 feet that if you structure your life this way, this is kind of what goes on.
Okay, so that's interesting. I want to ask you about this.
Yeah,
we're getting into something like, we call holistic biblical theology here, where you have to understand what the Bible as a whole is presenting you in terms of truth.
Right.
You cannot actually just take things in a vacuum.
Sure, yeah.
Maybe speak to that a little bit for everyone. Like, how can people do that well? What are ways people can do that well?
We were just so one example, we were just talking about this where someone asked us, why when I read this Bible passage, the disciples say, well, what are you doing, Jesus? And he says, well, haven't you learned this yet? Why don't you understand? Why are you so slow? Why don't you understand, what I did with the loaves and the fishes or whatever? And if you just read that story without having read the loaves and the fishes, you might be like, oh, why is he saying that? That doesn't really make sense. But then you go back in your devos and you read that story and then put them together and go, oh, I see. There's a flow of this and a flow of that. I think the same thing is true. If we just kind of parachute into these random things and then build a whole theology out of half a verse, it can become dangerous.
Right.
And so the Psalms is you got to read that, okay, holistically, what's the big idea? And that's why some of these Psalms, we can get halfway through them and I can be like, hey, I feel like I really preached the big heart of that Psalm. I can move on. I don't need to now I'm going to make sure I hit that half a verse next week because I missed it this week. And I think that's a different approach than if we're hitting Romans and I stopped at chapter 3, verse 20. I couldn't just move on to chapter 4. I'd be like, no, 21's really important. We got to unpack the, whatever. So
no, that's good.
So it's a little more, yeah.
I mean, you see it all the time, right? Because you see people build these things and you can get off track with, you read passages that talk about, God will always, give things to his children or these kinds of ideas.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, well, in a vacuum, that sounds great.
Yeah.
And then you build a whole way of seeing God and living and your hopes and expectations around that without everything else in the Bible that tells you, no, there's a way you need to read that statement.
Yes.
You can't just extract that. But I think I would suggest part of that, the very basic level, is you got to read your whole Bible. Mm-hmm. If you don't actually read your whole Bible, you don't know what it's actually telling you as a whole. Yeah. If you're only spending time here and here because those are the parts you like, well, you're not putting those in the context of everything else.
Yeah.
So I think that's okay. What would you say is what would be your favorite book of the Bible?
Oh man,
it's interesting. Actually, I should let everyone know.
Question.
You mentioned Proverbs while you're thinking about this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We debated doing Proverbs instead of Psalms.
Yes.
We actually had a fierce and intense debate.
Yes.
Back and forth about which book, and then finally landed on Psalms.
Did you win?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure. You kept pushing me on Proverbs.
Right. Proverbs could be good too, yes.
Proverbs would be good too.
I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. I mean, favorite book. I mean, you don't want to say, oh, this is, everything to me because then there's... But
it resonates with you.
Books I love. Look, can I throw 3 or 4?
Yes,
okay.
sure. Your top 3.
Okay. I love Genesis. I think the narrative of Genesis is so ridiculously good.
Yes.
I remember reading it in 2 sittings, over 2 days. I was going to say 1 day, but no, 2 days. And it's like watching Breaking Bad. It's like you are in the throes of an amazing narrative, and this guy's raping this guy's sister, and then these people are coming in and doing this, and you're like, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Is that guy going to get a face full of death?
It's a disaster.
It's a
gong
total
show.
disaster. It's brilliant. I love 1st and 2nd Samuel, which is what I'm reading now.
People think Genesis and they think, Adam and Eve, and maybe a little bit of stuff with like Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah, no,
they don't
Joseph.
realize it's like
it's all this great stuff.
Going
Jacob
on.
and
provocative
half of it's Joseph and his whole thing, and so it's really. And then I'm reading 1st, 2nd Samuel right now, which I think is amazing storytelling. And you took Hebrew in university, and I did Greek, but both languages, especially Hebrew, though, have this amazing depth of multiple layers of meaning in the way they tell stories, and and so there's you can mine that for your whole life, right? The way you get to Noah and you realize that Noah's name in Hebrew means rest, and you go, what is the symbol of this guy who's floating on a boat where rest is this Sabbath image, and now the new creation is being revealed by the water is dispelling like it did 5 chapters ago when it moved in creation. Now there's new creation. There's only so many animals, and there's a floating thing, and then that's a symbol of the temple, which comes later because it's designed in such a way, but it's really an Eden, and temple's an Eden image, and the tabernacle. All these brilliant depths of what you get into. So I love narratives because narrative theology, I think, is very fun and exciting because you're like, that actually meant this and that's picked up later and all of that. So and
fun fact, I taught 1 Samuel in the summer, and probably you're gonna have to teach 2 Samuel this summer because I think everyone in class is like,
they dug it.
we're doing 2 Samuel, right? Like
Right.
you can't leave us.
Yeah, can't leave us on the
end
edge.
of 1
What happens
Samuel
at the
here,
end?
we gotta know.
Not to put you on the spot, do you learn?
David's
how is it?
ascending into kingship against Saul at the end of the book,
Oh,
and
yes,
Saul's
okay.
demise and everything. And so
Right.
then it's like,
Has
well, now
Saul
what happens?
started trying to kill him yet at the end of 1 Samuel?
Yeah.
Chasing him around Israel, trying to get at him? Okay. And he's running around with his merry men trying to survive?
Yeah, David's on the run.
Robin Hood, man. It's
Yeah,
brilliant.
it's
Jesus. Yeah. Jesus running around as the true king of Israel, as the actual king tries to kill him, running around with merry men around Israel trying to live. I mean, it's
okay. So we'll count Samuel 1 and 2 as the same book.
Yeah, 1, 2 Samuel, 100%. And then I go Mark, John, and Ephesians. I think if I had those on a desert island.
Okay, this is very interesting. Yeah. You've chosen 5 books and not the book you literally did your thesis on.
No.
So people associate you with Romans a lot, but is that like not really like a passion kind of thing for you, or is it?
It is. I think it's a great question because I love Romans and could teach it. I want to say in my sleep, but that sounds. I couldn't. I mean, the depth of Romans is so insane that. But literally, when I get up and teach it, I don't prep. It's because I've spent 10 years studying it.
Right.
Okay, so every nuance of it. Every commentary on it I could read. Every footnote chased me down to 3 other footnotes. And so I've spent, since my second year of college, since 2000 or 2001, however long that is, it's actually longer than 10 years, thinking about Romans, exegeting Romans, dreaming about it. How does 1:18 set up 2:14, and how does 3 connect into 9, and the questions he raises in 3 or what he deals with in 9 to 11, but then that, all of that,
right.
It's like I bleed it, but I'm trying to answer the question, like, so I love it, but I'm almost like, it's so been part of my life that when you say, what are you invigorated to read right now, and what should these people kind of be reading as inspiration, I want to go to those 5 books instead of Romans. Cool. So that's why I answered it that way. But yes, of course, Romans is a passion, deep passion, and I love it.
Yep. I think for me, I would say...
Yeah. What about you?
Thanks for asking.
So I didn't know if this was supposed to be a 2-way podcast. What about you, Jeremy? What are your favorite?
Yeah.
What's your favorite book?
Well, my favorite book is hard to choose between 2, Exodus and Job. I'm not sure between those 2 what my favorite would
Job.
be. Those 2 are my favorite books, probably.
I
literally, if I only had Job, I'd be fine. Like, I could just study
as a
and read
rewatchable?
that book for the rest of my life.
So I listen to this podcast on movies called The Rewatchables.
Yeah.
And they talk for 2-3 hours on movies, films that are just rewatchables. It's great. And so there's different categories. There's what's the best movie ever, and what's the most rewatchable.
Right.
And so for you, is Job like The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2, where it's like you could literally turn it on as you did through high school every weekend and watch it?
Yeah.
Or is it like Schindler's List, where it's like, this is maybe the greatest thing ever put to film, but I can only watch it like 5 times in my life. I'm not putting it on the weekend and making a bag of popcorn.
That's a good question.
What is Job? Because Job to me is a Schindler's List.
Yeah, it might be. I mean, here's the thing with Job to me, and it's
poetry.
funny because we're talking about art, right? Is Job is possibly the greatest piece of ancient art we have. Mm-hmm. Like, scholars talk about this, not biblical scholars, just scholars talk about this.
Well, there's Da Vinci Code, the book, and film.
and there's Job.
There's Job.
Right. But they literally look at Job and say, this could be the greatest piece of ancient art that exists.
Maybe predates Genesis.
Maybe.
The writing of it, but definitely the actual story itself.
And it's like just the way it's done and everything. And you get into the depth of every character. You talked about Hebrew.
Yeah.
Every character in the book of Job speaks in a different level of Hebrew
dialect.
It's the same language, but it's like in how complicated their poetry is. Mm-hmm. So it's like basic poetry, medium level poetry, and you get to God, and God speaks in what is considered to be possibly like the finest ancient poetry ever written that we have on record. And just like all these little things like that. And the themes of Job are like crazy.
Well, it's like
it can get repetitive though through the middle of the book. So
it's like when you read so I did Greek for 3 years, and when you read the Gospel of Luke, Luke is a physician, he was a doctor, and so his Greek is very high level.
Yes.
Where when you read First Peter, as you can imagine, First Peter's a fisherman and maybe the dunces out of the group. It's all a mess, you know. It's not great Greek. It's
the dunce who established the Church of Christ.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The first pope.
Yes.
For all the Catholic audience listening. Yeah. But it's like really, really low level, normal. Whereas Luke's pen is much more.
That's what's so fascinating about and we don't have time really. Maybe in another podcast we just talk genre the whole time, right? I mean, it's just fun. The idea of, and I agree with you on Genesis. I used to teach Genesis to the students here. Yeah. But I changed it to Exodus because there's too much.
There's a lot going on.
For one semester with these kids, it's like. There's a lot of explaining to do about a lot of those stories.
You got a lot of explaining to do. From the back, every week a kid would raise that. Yeah. Sorry, you got some explaining to do.
There's so many things. It's amazing. But New Testament, I like John. That's probably my John. New Testament book.
Yeah, John's because so many levels of art, and it's taking something and it's telling you what it all means, and it's very kind of esoteric and it's theological commentary. So you have what they call the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which comes from the Greek word for like, an optical, like they all see together kind of the same Jesus. So they're very similar. Matthew and Luke are building off Mark and extrapolating out stories. Mark was the first one written, but they all have this common view of Jesus, which he did this and he taught this. But then John's kind of this whole other thing where he's like, I'm going to tell you what this all means. He's probably writing later. He's probably assuming those 3 gospels in people's consciousness. And he's saying, now, what is so it's not just Jesus was born. It was the light came into the world. And the world did not, accept him. It's like, okay, now we're going to tell you what it all means. And we've never preached John at Village Church. And I think we will. Well, we definitely will. Yeah. At some point. It will take a while because of all that depth and meaning, because we could have a lot of fun going into the brilliance of what this does.
Well, maybe we'll put John on the list for.
I think maybe it's
when we debate out the next book. I mean,
comment under this video.
Yeah, let us know. What do you want us to actually hit in the next?
What do you think about the Gospel of John? Right now, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking maybe we do John.
Maybe we should.
Maybe we do John. What do you guys think? Tell us what you think about John.
I like getting back to a gospel. I mean, I think that would be good.
21 chapters of just brilliant stuff. It's amazing.
Okay, anyways, favorite book that's not a biblical book for you?
Oh, just a novel or a
what do you think,
fiction or nonfiction?
Like, this is my favorite book. I'm on an island and I can bring one book.
Fiction or nonfiction?
Well, let's say fiction.
Fiction. Okay. Well, I don't read enough fiction, but I would say the best novel I've ever read, I got halfway through the Brothers Karamazov. I wish I could sit here and tell you I love it and know it and got through it, but I couldn't because they say it's like maybe the greatest novel ever written. That and some of the other Russian stuff that you've read in black and white and whatever. But
I just finished Anna Karenina.
Yeah, so
it's
Tolstoy.
It's a
snob. But they say the Brothers Karamazov may be the greatest novel ever written. It's up there with the Tolstoy ones and a couple of the couple of the ones that they talk about. But so I'd like to say that, but I would honestly say that the most impactful novel I've ever read in my life is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I think that changed the way I viewed and interacted with art and literature in high school. I read that. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. You like Tale of Two Cities? Dickens is amazing.
I haven't read Tale of Two Cities. Okay. I haven't read a lot of Dickens.
It is actually from the vantage point of so it's brilliant writing, obviously. Like every sentence is thought through. The guy's unbelievable with the English language. But what's cool about it, for those of you out there, going, boring, it's actually not boring at all. It's the plot is amazing, and what it does in the end is it's a surprise ending. So everything turns and flips, and you're like, what, wait, what? And so it's got this kind of, which I also heard about So one of the things we do with our kids is we read them, we homeschool, and so we read them all these so Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Yeah.
The whole day was spent reading a book about Martin Luther King Jr., what he did, watching films of him. They had to write a little essay on him, whatever, right? So, and then this kid, not to bash public school, it was great. This kid came over who goes to school after that, and my kid's like, so it was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, like what'd you do in school? She's like, who? We didn't talk about anything. It's like, oh gosh. So anyway, but one of the things that we read when we were away, we read them a book, Who is J.K. Rowling, and we were talking about her story, about how she wrote Harry Potter and all. And her favorite book was Emma, by
Jane Austen.
Jane Austen, yeah. And when you look at those Austens and Bronte sisters and all that, we look at them as like maybe boring stories because we think of them. They actually are super plotty and have twists and turns. And she based the concept of how Harry Potter, like when you read Harry Potter, there's all these twists and turns and like you don't find out to the end of why that character. And she based that on so many readings of Emma. She was like, this is what I want. So we sometimes think these are all dusty stories that aren't interesting. These things are
There's a level of depth that you don't get in the quick media of today.
Yeah,
You open up one of these books, and you're like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, this is actually, they're spending 800 pages explaining a fairly simple story.
Yeah. It's an interesting question because art is okay. So here's a debate I have in my higher thinking moments. What would I rather, or what do I think is more powerful? Okay, a picture or words? So here's my example.
Well, there's a saying about this.
A picture's worth 1,000 words. Yes. There is? Someone else has thought of this? No, but here's my pushback to that. Okay, so as philosophers talk about this. So yes, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Meaning if I put a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. up on the thing, it's like, there's a picture, you're like, oh my gosh, there's nothing more brilliant than watching it because you see all the people in the background and he's up there and you get all these things. But as one guy I was listening to pointed out, he said, but think of this sentence, he said, I could show you a picture of the water turning into wine, okay?
Right.
Or I could say, the water saw its master and blushed. That's powerful.
Yep.
So, do you want a painting of Jesus' hand over the water? Or do you want to hear the water saw its master and blushed? That to me seems more powerful.
It's invoking your imagination in a way that kind of visual media doesn't in some ways.
Right. So we watch TV and we watch a guy get in bed, or we read a novel and it says something about what that all means and how it smelt. And anyway, so that's the debate.
There's actually a theological implication to this. This is the same reason why
Jesus movies are
why
the most
J.I. Packer
powerful
argues
form of medium.
That you should not have
drawings of Jesus,
pictures of God.
Right. Yeah.
Because he says it's actually out of the 10 Commandments, making images covers the idea of you shouldn't be creating a
graven
small
image.
idea of who God is that you look at.
It will limit.
Because it limits.
Well, it's more than just God, because of course that's blasphemous if we try to draw God. That's literally. But Jesus himself, he says, right?
He says,
don't do pictures, don't do.
He says, don't use the crucifix, like him hanging on a cross, as anything to do with like your worship experience.
Yeah.
Because
and
then
he says,
you reduce everything down to that moment.
He said when he wrote Knowing God, that's the thing he gets the most pushback about.
It
might be a part of his
book.
Puritan theology. Like he's a good Puritan boy, and I don't think they did Christmas or like they see all of that as
the funny
sinful.
story is, and we'll probably do this again. We have to decide this year at Good Friday whether we do the Passion of the Christ thing.
Yeah.
But I remember when I first came on Village.
Sorry, just to clear, not whether we talk about the Passion of the Christ as a historical event, but show the film.
So what we do here. So when I first came on at Village, we developed this whole presentation.
Yes, the Passion of the Christ
Good
film
Friday,
mixed in with worship.
Mixed in with the worship of Passion of the Christ. Yeah. And I remember working on this idea and then literally reading that chapter of Knowing God after we had done it and went,
oh, is this wrong?
Was everything I just created blasphemous?
Showing it.
And so every other year when we do it, I kind of go, it's a great service, right? Because it's so impactful for people and the response we get and everything. So I think, but I always have this thing in the back of my head of like Packer. Every year we do that going, are you sure?
I don't like that you show...
That's what he sounds like, actually.
The Passion of the Christ movie in the video. I don't like it.
3 hours.
That's what he would say.
3-hour lectures.
By the way, just By the way, just for people out there, and I think this is important for them to know, when people talk about the passion of the Christ, what I think people think is that it means like his excitement,
right?
Or he's passionate.
Yeah.
But historically, the word passion in the Greek comes from suffering, and they're called the passion narratives in the Gospels. So it's like when the story moves from Jesus is teaching stuff to now he's in Gethsemane, from the moment he's in Gethsemane to the moment he is dead, has historically been called the passion narratives. It's it's the narrative that focuses in just on his suffering, from the Greek word for suffering. And so that story, so a passion narrative, people used to go to passion plays around Easter historically, and what they weren't the story about Jesus and his whole life, like he's doing the Sermon on the Mount. It's just from Gethsemane to his death. That's what Mel Gibson's doing in that movie, drawing on a deep Catholic background of the suffering story. That's why it opens at Gethsemane. It's not a life of Jesus. So when you're saying the passion of the Christ, it's literally his suffering. It's the story about his suffering, and people sometimes think that movie's great. It shows the real passion of Jesus. He's really jacked up about what he's doing.
Time and culture, it's like we all have it's so important what our passion is.
Right, so
the vernacular we use.
Story about Jesus' Enneagram.
Oh yeah, this is like his whole...
His profile.
No.
Yes.
Okay, we don't want to run out of time.
Yeah.
The book. So I noticed online that as these people are making all these end of decade posts.
Did I send you this online, or did you just notice?
No, I noticed on Facebook and stuff.
Okay.
That you started getting mentioned at end of decade lists of things, and one of those was the Zondervan Publishing Company, top books of the whole decade, and they listed your book on that, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah,
you put a lot of work into the book. Mm-hmm. I know for you, knowing you, that's cool to hear. I mean, we all like those kind of affirmations because it means they're saying that what you did was good work, which we all want to do good work. Yeah. So that's really great. But I know for you, more than that, the impact stuff is why you wrote the book. You didn't write a book like this so that you could just be told it was well written. No. You wrote a book like this so that people would come to Christ.
Yeah.
So what are some of the stories of that? Like that you've heard of people using it where you go, this is what has made this all worth it for me.
Yeah. Well, people post stories on Instagram or DM me or email me, and I've just had so many over the years, which is just like, hey, I was thinking of a guy talking to me the other day. He's like, all my 20-year-olds, walked away from the Lord, didn't care about anything, blah, blah, blah. And they all started, and then my son started dating this girl, and non-Christian, didn't really know how to lead her to Christ, and so gave her your book, read the book, came to Jesus, now comes to church, and blah, blah, blah. And so it's like, those kind of stories, and just those flood in, where it's like, I used your book, my friend came to Christ. I used your book because, and one thing people don't understand, sometimes confuse me when I get feedback about the book isn't meant to be read from start to finish. It's a topical book. You can parachute in. So a lot of people said I got bogged down in the science chapter, for instance. Right. I didn't understand certain words. I had to look them up, and I'm like, I did my best as any communication form would do, to boil it down in terms that everybody would understand, that the populace would understand. But if science isn't your thing, then just go to the hell chapter. Go to the sex chapter.
If hell's your thing.
Yeah, if hell's your thing. If your question is, can hell be legitimate?
Yes.
If your question is the exclusivity of Christ, if your question is sex, if your question is the Christ myth, then just hone it, just zero in on those chapters and use that with your friends. And so one way I've heard it is people will say, hey, let's both read the book together. They're non-Christian friends, right?
Okay.
Both read the book together, and then we'll get together for a coffee or a beer or whatever once a week, and we'll talk about that chapter. Right. So you read the chapter on sex, whatever.
Great way to do it.
Do it. Let's meet. Let's talk about it. What do you think? And it's non-Christian. Yeah. That way you're getting actual non-Christian feedback on ideas, and you're able to engage and use in that way. So I would tell you to read.
It's a resource.
It's a that's what that's what you hope. So those are some crazy stories that come in constantly, or how people used it, came to Christ because of it, and then preachers using it in their churches. Oftentimes you see that. both in the United States and in Canada, a couple in Europe even, where they do a whole series called The Problem of God, and they'll, sometimes they'll ask me, sometimes they won't. I don't, it's not like, I care. It's like, go. This is like the copyright. Use my stuff and never cite me. I don't care. Just preach to your people like it's yours. And people do that. And so it's pretty cool to see that, like pastors doing 8 weeks on this, and it's literally the images that they've taken and they use it up on the screen and they preach through the series, and it's great. So anyway, it's been amazing, and it's had more of an impact than I probably ever thought it did, or that maybe Zondervan thought it would originally. And so it's been awesome. So use it in that way.
So you're not done though, because you're writing a second book.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that. People may not know you're actually in the middle of writing another book now. Hopefully,
yeah.
Can be as
I literally
impactful as
I
this
was
book
writing
will.
it when we started recording this. So thanks for throwing this right in the center of my writing process. I'm just kidding. So I'm writing a chapter right now on miracles.
So what's the premise of the book?
So the premise of the book is the problem of Jesus. I think it's probably going to be called The Problem of Jesus. And it's specifically about the life and ministry, the kind of scandalous life and ministry of Jesus. And so the problem of his stories, meaning his the parables. What did they do? What were they? How did they function? The problem of Jesus himself, which is kind of a historical analysis on did he actually even exist? And if he did, what was he actually about? Like, was he about timeless stories was he just one of the Buddhas and one of the esoteric teachers of the time? What was his actual point? What was his message? What was his, and then the Gospels themselves, a kind of a defense of why historically they're trustworthy and why they make sense. And actually then, secondly, how they all work. And so we were kind of hinting at some of this, but the brilliance of like how the Gospels structure their narrative in order to make a theological point, that they're not like, it's not that he just like said all this stuff in that order and they just said this is what he did. They're doing theological work. They're taking something from later in his life and they're bringing it earlier because Mark's organizing the work for a certain agenda, so I go into all those little things, like, it's fascinating. When he goes in, he curses the fig tree, or he goes in, he curses the temple, and then he curses the fig tree, and then he comes back out, and they're like, well, what did that fig tree mean? And then he comes back out, and they're like, oh my gosh! And they're sandwiching this thing where the thing that he did to the fig tree is going to happen to the temple, because all of this organizing. Sermon on the Mount, he probably just doesn't do. It takes, I don't know, 20 minutes to read the Sermon on the Mount out loud. I don't know, 12. Probably doesn't mean he just said that. It's a compilation of what he was doing over a weekend. It's always so. What do the Gospels mean? And then I have a chapter on loving God. I have a chapter on the cost of discipleship. So just like miracles, So one part of it's like a defense of this stuff, so that you can kind of like the problem of God, where it's an apologetic for Jesus and all these things. But then there's probably even more so than the problem of God, I'm going to write to a Christian audience as well about Jesus and what all this meant. And so I have this, weaving in modern psychology and Jordan Peterson stuff and Freakonomics and, all of these things to compile to just a great book about everything I've read about Jesus in the last 20 years, and going, here's my presentation, not only to a skeptic, but also to a Christian reflection on who Jesus is.
So give us right now just a quick, this is the mind-blowing thing about the miracles chapter you're writing right now that you're just working on right in this moment, and people are like getting to drop in and see your manuscript.
Okay, I'm not going to say that it's mind-blowing, right? I mean, I didn't, one of the things I was going to do, I was going to structure it like, here's what Jesus' miracles are all about. Mm-hmm. And then I was going to argue why philosophically it actually makes sense that miracles could exist. But then I read C.S. Lewis's book on miracles, and he said you got to do it in reverse order. You have to argue for the probability of philosophically about miracles, and then move into did Jesus actually do these? And so I've spent 2 months on the philosophy piece. It's 25 pages. Now this stuff gets edited down, but right now I got 25 pages on the philosophy of miracles and the scientific probability of miracles, and arguing against the old apologetic, the old argument that miracles. So a naturalist, a materialist, most people walking around the Western world, their deduction is Jesus didn't do miracles because miracles can't happen. Why can't miracles happen? Because Naturalism is true.
Right.
Basically, nothing outside of the laws of nature actually take place. We all know this. This was the argument of David Hume. So I go into why David Hume is wrong, why Enlightenment philosophy is wrong, and why that old picture of science with these fixed laws has all been blown up by the new science that's out. So quantum mechanics, physics, it's all redrawing all these old Newtonian versions of there are fixed laws and everything. And it's like, no, quantum mechanics is like, dude, there could be literally one thing on the universe over here and it disappears and reappears on the other side. Like the universe is the crazy, and we're learning crazy stuff about the universe where it's like nothing's off the table anymore. That old, like an apple fell from a tree and hit me on the head. Like, so there's all these fixed laws. All that's out the window. Right. So I'm going into all these, like, what are the new scientists saying? And based on the new science, it's like miracles, yeah, totally could happen because the universe is way more complex than we ever thought. Anyway, so it's kind of deconstructing the old arguments of miracles can't happen, showing them to be circular, showing them that they more come out of a kind of an a priori, I already believe this, thus I'm not going to believe that, versus the evidence actually is that miracles can't happen. So I go into why the evidence actually, because, for instance, so David Hume said, we know that miracles don't happen because every experience we have in life, they don't happen. And so the probability is so low because whatever. And of course now, Craig Keener wrote a book, 2 volumes, 800 pages. And half of the book is going into modern day medically legit, because he's an academic, right? Yeah. He's not like a crazy, like, I think you're healed because he's like, let's go into the data, into all of these claims of miracles. He goes in, he's claiming there's 200 million modern claims of miracles in direct response to prayer. Okay, so he goes into all 7 continents, Africa, Asia, Latin America, goes to all of them, documents out for 500 pages the story about this miracle. And my point is, I start sharing some of these, and then I'm like, look, only one of these needs to be true for naturalism to be false. Only one. And not only one in modern times, take them all for the last 1,000 years. Only one has to be true for all of naturalism to fall apart and say you can't have that as a worldview and a construct. And then I talk about, because he talks about probabilities, mathematical probabilities of miracles happening. So I go into stories about, the mathematical probability, of the universe. If you're a naturalist, it's all problematic because the universe should have never come into existence. And origin of life, of course, the chances of the origin of life are impossible. Just leaving nature by itself. But I go into like these, the perfect bridge hand, the statistic on getting the perfect bridge hand are so great. Like literally it would take me like, a full minute to write out the amount of zeros or whatever. And yet there's many people who have said it's actually happened to them. Right. I tell the sweet baby Jesus story and talk about all the probabilities, the chances of all these things happening, but it happened. So we can't go, my experience says the probability is this area. Anyways, all of that to say, I get into that and a whole bunch of other philosophical cool things about, now I'm into the piece about, okay, now Jesus and his miracles in the Gospels, what are they? What did people see? And the fact that the most liberal, skeptical scholars, Rudolf Bultmann, who didn't believe any of this stuff was true, like in the Gospels, he even says, John Dominic Crossan, who runs the Jesus Seminar, who basically has beads about how none of this actually happened, even all them say, miracles actually happened in Jesus' ministry. All the historical data tells us they did. There was a phenomenon that happened with him that the only explanation is that it actually happened. Now, what are we going to do with that? Right. And so I'm going into a lot of that and talking about, okay, so here's something I just wrote. How many, I'm just going to ask you this on the spot, and you're not dumb if you get this answer wrong because I didn't know it till yesterday. If I said to you, take Matthew, Mark, Luke, John.
Yes.
Don't count a redo.
Okay.
How many miracles, different, unique miracles across all 4 Gospels do you think they record of Jesus?
So redos count as 1.
Redos count as 1.
So just original miracles.
Add them all. Hey, I read Matthew, I read Mark, I read Luke, I read John. This is how many separate miracle accounts there are of Jesus. Unique miracles.
Oh, man.
And I never thought about this until yesterday, and so I'm
going to say like 15.
Okay. It's a pretty good guess. 34.
Okay.
34 separate.
That's a little more than I thought.
34 separate miracles. Now, if you
I said 15 because I figure my thinking was,
Why is he
I bet you
asking
it's
me?
very low because
Right.
there's all sorts of stuff that's repeated.
So
and
here's
stuff.
right. So then you get. So what I talk about is you got 34 different miracles. You got 6 exorcisms, 3 raisings from the dead. I go through the kind of data and talk about. So you got a 30-year guy, 35-year guy, 3 years of ministry. So he's doing 10 a year.
Right.
Now
That would be noticeable.
Now, 10 a year, but I'm going. I thought he's doing a couple a day.
Right.
Now, but here's my point. Now there are these. Here's the next thing I say. But there are these summary statements, in all 4 gospels that say, and he healed all of them.
Right. So I was going to ask you that before I answered.
Yes.
I was going to say, what about those moments? where-
So, and he healed them, and then he had this group, and he healed all of them. So he could have been like 300 over there and whatever. But they uniquely do 34. And my point to that is, when the skeptics say, the early church created the gospels and made up stories about Jesus, and they're legends and they're myths, and they're all made up. My kind of argument is, if that were true, you'd think they'd do more stuff, and they'd extrapolate more. These are very humble. They're very restrained presentations of Jesus. That's my point. They're very there's only 34.
Right.
And when they do them, it's not like, and he started to glow, and he shot fire. He's just like touching it, walk away, don't tell anybody. There's a humility to it all, a restraint that I think is
you
brilliant.
could almost argue, you could go either way. Or you'd say, why didn't they just account like 1 or 2 incredible that no one could ever now verify?
Right.
You know what I mean? In
Right.
some way.
And they're very public.
You know.
And then Richard Bauckham talks about the idea that they name people, and why they're naming people is so that there's eyewitness accounts. They're footnoting them. They're saying, if you doubt this, go and check
Right.
on this guy and his village.
Go ask
and
Matthias.
Jairus' daughter. Yeah, exactly.
knows?
And that's the brilliance of the New Testament, and why it's not mythology. It's not legend, because those stories read very differently than the Gospels do. The Gospels tell us little, like what C.S. Lewis, as a guy who used to read mythology and poetry in medieval, he's an Oxford professor of medieval literature, he would go, these are unlike all of the stories at the time, because he's like, modern narratives, modern novels say little things like, it started to rain and there was a cushion on the left side of the boat. Like he's like, no story at that time talked like that. Modern novels did. And he's like, so one of 2 miracles are happening. Either they're actually just telling us what happened, or someone predicted the entire genre of modern novelistic narrative and put it in there. Either way, it's a miracle. Yeah.
Right.
So all that to say, these are like presentations that are super humble. He healed that lady. He did this. He did this. And so I'm getting into all of that and saying, man, historically, this is actually legit. Like, miracles actually happen. And then the last section, okay, now what does all that mean, for us? So anyway, so that just happens to be something I'm working on right now.
One section of one
Yeah.
part of the new book you're writing.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's a lot more.
A lot more to come.
When do you think it's going to be done? This is my last question.
Yeah,
We
I'm
gotta
done
wrap up.
I'm done 6 out of 10 chapters, 7 out of 10 chapters right now. So
Okay.
I'm 70%, 80% done.
So I don't know what that means.
It probably comes. Yeah, I don't know. It probably comes out.
When do you think
it'll come out in
hand
2021?
Nice.
The goal was January 2021.
Okay.
I may miss that just because I want it to be something I'm proud of. Like this came out 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. I'm still as proud of it today as I was when I published it. And so I refuse to kind of publish something in a rush that I'm going to like in 6 months.
Because they want to get you on the marketing train and all that. Like, no, you want it to be.
No, I want it to
Well,
be
maybe
my best work.
Maybe you'll hit January. Maybe it'll be
But it's going to be an awesome book. It's going to be very... Yeah, we didn't... originally, we were going to try to do fall of this year. And you know why we didn't?
Right. Oof. Oh, this current year.
This year right now.
No, why?
Election in the States.
This coming
Trump
year.
versus whomever
Oh, I see.
will take over everything, and no one's going to be looking at your Instagram post about read the problem of Jesus. They're going to be like, Trump just blew up the world or whatever. And so it's going to be like, nothing's getting through. So everyone's just waiting.
Yeah,
no one's publishing anything for
no,
like 4 months.
I'm hearing that about all sorts of different marketing stuff.
It's like, everyone just shut down, stay at home. So anyway, so it's going to be 2021, hopefully first quarter.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're looking forward to it. Thanks
you.
for listening. Thanks for watching. And we'll see you next time on our Anything Goes podcast.